A year ago, I found myself walking through the downtown core of my city in the dead of night. I'm a young female and was unexpectedly alone, since I'd just broken up with my boyfriend at a Christmas party an hour before. So I was in a rush to get home to my warm bed and drink myself to sleep. I remember crying. The tears slid down my cheeks in streams, their warmth like razors against my chilled skin. I wiped at them furiously, cursing myself for my weakness and the time I'd wasted on a man that had never loved me. As I walked, darting between the shadows of the empty street and light of the lamps above, I caught the faintest glimpse of white in my peripheral vision. Coming to a stop at the edge of the sidewalk, I look up. On the edge of one of the city's oldest abandoned historical buildings was a young woman in a billowing white gown. She stood on the ledge of the building's roof barefoot, a hauntingly white silhouette against the inky darkness of night. Somehow, even though she was stories above me, we made eye contact. "Wait!" The word tore from my raw throat, ricocheting through the silent street around me like a bullet. "Please, just wait. I'm coming to you." Knowing with every second I was losing precious time, I quickly called the police and began searching desperately for a way into the old building. Its giant glass windows yawned before me, their insides covered with browning old newspapers. If I can just break a window, I can get in, I thought, frantically, searching for something to smash the window with. To my relief, I found a hefty piece of brick that had broken off the old building feet away. Wielding it without hesitation, I threw it through the window, jumping back as the glass shattered. Tearing what was left of the newspaper away, I stepped into the ominous darkness beyond. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shapes of furniture covered in white tarps, and even what I thought could be a chandelier hanging in the center of the room. "It looks like some kind of lobby," I observed, bringing out my phone and switching on its flashlight. Maybe it was a hotel? If it is, there should be a stairwell nearby. Sure enough, next to the ancient-looking elevators, there was a stairwell leading to the roof. Looking at it with trepidation, I wondered if I was already too late, but regardless, I yanked the door open, its hinges screeching until it came to rest against a nearby wall. Sucking in a lung full of the musty air, I stepped into the pitch-black stairwell. I climbed carefully, my light barely cutting through the density of the darkness, aware that the stairs could give out under me any minute. With every step, the hairs raised on the back of my neck with the undeniable feeling of being watched, making me shiver and pick up my pace. Finally, I made it to the top, and with a mild struggle, I managed to open the rooftop door. It swung slowly outward, revealing the barren, snow-capped rooftop, and the woman. Out of breath, I stepped forward cautiously, my boots crunching through the icy snow as I approached her. She stood with her back to me, the wind tearing at her long dress viciously, whipping it around her like curtains in a hurricane. She did not react or even turn to look at me as I called out to her gently. "I've been where you are," I said softly, my voice just barely legible above the howling wind. "Hell, I'm in pain now. Tonight I had to break things off with the man I thought I was going to marry." Silence. But you have to know," I continued, taking another hesitant step. "Life is worth living no matter how painful it gets. Your life is worth something still, no matter why you're up on this roof to begin with. Slowly, the woman began to turn towards me, and I stumbled back in terror. I screamed as her mangled face came into view, her empty eye sockets burning holes through my own as she stared through me. The woman's body and face looked like they'd been crushed from a traumatic impact, her deathly gray skin streaked with blood where shards of bone had penetrated through it, disfiguring her horribly. Her long, tangled black hair blew around her mutilated face, and the wind framing it like some kind of dark halo. And to my growing horror, I realized that what I'd once assumed was a pure white wedding dress was actually a blood-soaked mess down the front. I wish, she gurgled, blood seeping from her cracked gray lips, that someone had told me that before I jumped. What? I stammered, shaking violently. What are you? Lonely. Before I could think of running, she moved at an impossibly fast speed towards me, snatching me by my neck in seconds and bringing her grotesque face inches from mine. The others failed to join me, but you might be the exception. She gurgled, her broken jaw and bloody, toothless mouth making the words come out laced with a scent of decay. I began to let out a choked scream before being suddenly dropped to the ground. Dazed and fighting to bring air back into my lungs, she took the opportunity to snatch my hair in her skeletal grip and began dragging me towards the edge of the roof. I screamed and kicked uselessly as my scalp was seared with a fiery pain, watching through tear-filled eyes as my potential death grew closer with every step she took. Suddenly, I found myself being hoisted over the edge, and dangling by the hood of my winter coat, I let out a wail of fear as the ground loomed below me, crying desperately for help. You will join me. She laughed out maniacally, the sound warping into something demonic. Please, I screamed. You don't have to do this. The woman only grinned in an unnaturally wide smile. With that, she let go. For a moment, I was falling through midair, desperately reaching out for anything I could find before I could fall to my death. And when I was able to latch on to the edge of the roof, I hung on for dear life, my knuckles going white with the strain of keeping myself attached to the ledge, and looked to where she would have been pleadingly, tears streaming down my face, but found no one. As my fingers were beginning to slip, I heard a glorious sound. Footsteps. The roof door burst open as 2 police officers rushed towards me, coming over and quickly pulling me up by the arms. Are you all right? One of them asked as she laid me out on the snow-covered ground, but I was too hysterical to speak, and before I knew what was happening, the world tilted and everything went black. Hours later, I woke up in a hospital surrounded by my family and friends. I tried my best to explain what had happened, giving them and the police a butchered version of the story that would seem believable, but I could tell most of them knew there was something more to it. After I managed to convince them that I would survive a few minutes alone, I picked up my phone off the bedside table next to me and began to do some research. Eventually, I came across an old article. It talked about a tragic suicide that had taken place in the 60s at the old hotel. Apparently, a woman named Delaney and her new husband, Robert Williams, had held the after-party in the hotel's ballroom. But when it came time for the first dance between the newlyweds, the groom was nowhere to be found. After the rest of the wedding party band together to search for him, the bride made the unfortunate discovery of her new husband in bed with her younger sister. Humiliated and heartbroken, still wearing her ring and wedding dress, she had snuck up to the roof and thrown herself off. After I'd finished reading the article, I'd slumped back into my hospital bed, deep in thought. It didn't take long for me to come to the conclusion that I had to do something to spare others from the woman's angry spirit. And so I hatched a plan. As soon as I'd been discharged, I did some digging and came up with the information I was looking for. Robert Williams' address. I drove to the outskirts of the city and after an hour, turned onto a lonely dirt road. I parked outside his house, exiting my truck, my heart in my throat. When I reached his door, I knocked a few times, and to my surprise, he answered fairly quick. He was a tall, balding man in his late 70s, with what looked like permanently haunted blue eyes. Just by looking at him, I could tell he'd been handsome back in his day. I introduced myself quickly, asking if he had time to talk, but he fixed me with a stubborn glare and bluntly told me he didn't want what I was selling. Before he could close the door in my face, I stuck my boot out, stopping him. "It's about Delaney," I said desperately. "Please, just hear me out. It's important." He'd stared at me blankly for a moment before reluctantly opening his door and gesturing silently for me to come in. Awkwardly, I sat on his couch as he placed a cup of hot, steaming tea in front of me alongside a box of biscuits. "Talk," he demanded, sipping from his own cup. So I did. I told him my entire story from start to finish, and when I was done, the tea in my cup had gone cold. There was a long beat of silence. "So what?" he asked, slowly, leaning forward with a puzzled expression. "If this story of yours is true, what would you propose we do?" I smiled. "That's where you come in." And that same night, we met outside the old hotel. As the sun set, the snow fell softly around us as we pried off the makeshift barrier the police had put up over the window that I had broken from my last visit. I shivered as we finally entered the familiar lobby, but not from the chill in the air. "We go this way," I said to Robert, turning and pointing towards the stairwell. "I know the way," he said, brushing past me. I followed him closely as we climbed the seemingly endless stairs to the roof. Once we stood behind the roof door, the only thing separating us from our possible deaths, I turned to Robert one last time. "Are you sure you're ready to face her?" I asked. "I knew I'd have to one day," he replied solemnly, before turning and pushing the door open. Despite what I'd expected, she was already waiting for us. She stood silhouetted against the fading winter sky and the twinkling backdrop of the city below, her back to us as her white dress blew gently around her in the wind. "Delaney?" Robert called out uncertainly, taking a step forward. She turned at the sound of his voice, her mangled face worse than the last time I had seen it. "Robert," she gurgled, her eyelid sockets widening as if in surprise. He dropped to his knees in the snow, his face a mask of sorrow. What have I done to you? He choked out, tears streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. You killed me, she answered, her voice colder than the snow falling around us. I staggered back in shock. She had somehow changed her appearance. No longer was she the gruesome specter that had haunted my nightmares, but a gorgeous young woman. She stood before him clean and unbroken, her skin a soft, unblemished ivory, complemented by glistening black hair that fell to her waist in romantic waves, paired with a striking olive green eyes. Currently, though, those beautiful eyes were filling with tears. You betrayed me, she wailed, the tears finally falling. You took me as your wife, but took my sister in our bed. Robert winced as her anguished screams cut through the silence of the night and deeper still into his soul. I know, he admitted, dropping his face into his hands. You're right. I'm the cause for your suffering. You didn't deserve this, Delaney, and I didn't deserve you. I'm so sorry. Taking in a shaky breath, he dropped his hands and slowly stood, facing her. I loved you, and I still do. It's why I'm here, he confessed, taking another step toward her. But back when I was young, and I hadn't been honest with myself about what I was ready for, I cheated out of fear of a lifetime commitment. I wasn't mature enough to handle yet. He extended a hand to her. After some hesitation, she took it. I only know one way to make this right, darling, he said, and together they stepped up on the ledge of the roof. Frozen to the spot in fear, I watched as he turned to her, lacing his fingers with hers and gazing deeply into her eyes. Living a lifetime without you, Delaney, has been more damning than anything I could have imagined. And I never loved your sister, or any woman, again after you, he said, reaching up and tenderly stroking her cheek. I'm ready to be with you now, and I promise you'll never be alone again. I hope you can forgive me one day. I do, she replied softly, a sad smile gracing her tear-streaked face. Wrapping his arms around her, he pulled her into a tight embrace, kissing her passionately. No! I screamed, lunging forward, but it was too late. In each other's arms, they fell off the edge. Moments later, I heard the telling wet crunch of a body hitting the ground below. Sobbing, I hurried to the ledge, collapsing and peering down. As I looked, I saw Robert's broken body face down on the sidewalk, a pool of blood slowly growing around him as he lay still, but there was no sign of Delaney. Later, I anonymously called the police to report Robert's death. Days after it was ruled a suicide and cruelly dubbed as poetic justice by the media, after they dug up his past with a hotel. I turned off the TV, and after seeing that headline, sighed tiredly and decided to turn in for the night. As I was sleeping, I dreamed. Robert and Delaney stood next to my bed. Robert looking decades younger in a sharp black tux with his arm wrapped snugly around her waist, and Delaney in a vibrant white gown, both smiling down at me happily. Thank you for bringing him back to me, Delaney said, resting her head on Robert's shoulder. You're welcome, I replied, stunned. In the blink of an eye, they'd vanished. Seconds later, I woke up, panting and covered in a cold sweat. Well, I do feel like I'm being spoiled. A few of these stories have been really, really good. Actually, many of them have. And there's many more in the process that I can't wait to release. Put some out. Can't wait to narrate. Can't wait to write my own stories, just full of paper and computer work. But I finally moved into my new office, so that makes it easier. And I hope you all are enjoying this too, those of you that have stuck by me since almost a year ago, since I started this. A few months, up into a year. And just if you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed reading it to you, like and subscribe. Comment. I do love seeing comments. Let me know that I'm doing a pretty good job and I can keep this going for you. Until then, until next time, this has been Hero's Edge.